I'm Thomas, and you're listening to the Racing Podcast, where who would have thought this week we are going to preview Gravel's main event that is going to unfold over in the United States, in Emporia, Kansas, to be precise. Of course, I'm talking about Unbound, and specifically the Unbound 200, the 200 miles or 320 and something kilometer race that is allegedly, presumably, the most important race in the gravel calendar every year. It may or may not get some competition nowadays from races such as the Trucker over in Europe or the UCI Gravel World Championships. But that being said, I think it's fair to say it's still the most regarded, most fought for race, and I can already let you know that it comes with a super stacked field. Everybody who is in gravel racing and many names who are not regularly in gravel racing are coming to Emporia to race this main event. Today, I'm actually going to do a solo episode because why not? I just published the Gravel Stack newsletter where I did the preview of the race in written, and I figured I would bring you the updates right into your ear if you are a racing podcast listener, so you also get to know what's going on. So let me start by talking about the conditions that you find out there in Emporia, Kansas. In case you're not familiar with Unbound, you essentially have northbound and you have southbound years where the course takes you either north or south from Emporia. This year, the course is pretty much exactly like the one from last year. It is going to the north, and that means you will essentially find a fair amount of rolling hills, even though nothing out there is really steep. Overall, you have like 3,100 meters of elevation gain over a distance of 326 kilometers. So that is to say you really don't need to be a climber, but it's also not completely flat. There is some up and down. It's rolling. You will also find, or the racers will also find, the Little Egypt, the super infamous segment that is rough. I know we talked about it here on the show with Paul and Amanda when we handed out the season awards late last year, and Little Egypt won as the most infamous or the most, I don't know actually what we called the award, but it was the segment, the most remarkable thing in any race. I, however, heard some whispers that the gravel in the segment has been altered, changed, and allegedly it is no longer as rough and as sketchy as it used to be. I haven't been there, haven't ridden it, neither before nor after, so I can't comment on this, but that is what the people with the wheels on the ground, tires on the ground are saying. So maybe Little Egypt isn't what it used to be anymore, which essentially means people would have a lower chance of flatting there, because that is what caused all the mayhem that it has been known for. Well, so that it is. We have a northbound course. It is essentially Unbound as we know it. The one open question is, as always the case at Unbound, is it going to be a mud year? And that is why you hang out on weather forecast sites and you want to get the info. However, as you probably know, weather forecasting, especially multiple days ahead, even in 2025, where we have all this great technology, still isn't so precise. Which is to say, in the end, we don't know. But I checked multiple sites, multiple weather forecasting sites, and my conclusion is maybe there is some mud, maybe not. So there were some sites that had like the next few days with rain. Other sites had them more dry or just very occasional little showers. we will have to wait and see. I saw a lot of footage from people in Kansas, in Emporia, already doing some reconning. It was mostly dry conditions. I encountered one little video, I think it was in a story from Morgan Aguirre, and she showed some pretty nasty deep puddle, and her wheel was completely stuck after she rode through it. So yeah, today there can be some sections that are muddy. However, if the next days are predominantly dry, it will probably not be a mud fest as I believe 2 years ago. So that is the weather forecasting side. Of course, the other topic that can happen on this track where you have basically no trees, no shade, is heat. We will also have to see how hot it is, but that is more of an condition that it's the same for everybody. And yes, some people are more heat adapted and more tolerant to heat, so it creates advantages, but that is essentially the same for all. Whereas mud, I think, changes the race to a higher degree, just because thanks to the mud, people not only get stuck, but they get mechanicals. Your off-road and mud skills become more important. People who have a cyclocross background, they suddenly have an advantage over riders, for instance, from a road background who are not as well versed in riding through the mud. So all that is to say, follow the weather forecast and then we will see. And that actually leads me to a pretty important piece of news. If you haven't heard yet, this year, Lifetime decided that they are going to produce a live stream of the race and put it on YouTube for free. Yes, you heard it correctly. You can watch Unbound 2025 in full length even live on YouTube. The link of which you can already find over on the Lifetime Grand Prix YouTube channel. I also put it directly in my newsletter, so in case you want to find it, jump over to thegravelstack.substack.com, and there you will find it as well in the big Unbound preview. Great news. As you know, we regularly talk about the way how gravel is broadcast or not broadcast, and how we can turn gravel into a better experience for the fans at home. And obviously, watching the races live is a major first step, not only because people can watch it. I mean, we even here talked about how Unbound as a race is probably not the first race to broadcast because it's not the most exciting view. That being said, there is also a secondary effect because people like me, like other content creators out there, they can see what happens and they can talk a lot more about the sport. There is a lot more insight to be gained. We can understand the racing much better. We learn much more about the riders than we do from a few Instagram live stories. And that is therefore really a big advantage. And in the end, we are talking about the main event of the season, as I said in the intro, and therefore I'm stoked and I will definitely tune in to watch the race live, as you would have probably guessed. On a professional note, so to speak, I'm also very curious what the production quality is going to be, how they approach the live stream. So we now saw a fair number of live streams, including the Trucker live stream, including the Garmin Gravel Worlds live stream, and they were different experiences, and I think we're nudging closer and closer to nailing the format, and I'll be really curious how the lifetime vision for live coverage of the races looks like. But now with all of this out of the way, I'm sure you didn't come here for weather forecasts, and you also didn't come here for links to live streams. You came here because you want to know who is going to win Unbound. Let's get there. So the way how I'm going to do my predictions or my list of contenders is in buckets. Yes, I put racers into 3 neat little buckets, and there are some rules which I defined them myself. So if I break them, these are my own. Really great if you can do your own rules. But they have names. The first bucket is called the top favorites. The second bucket is called the podium contenders. And the third buckets are wildcards. I think that's pretty self-explanatory naming, but just in case, here we go. The top favorites are the racers where I think the possibility of them winning definitely is the highest. I think if you are a betting man or woman, these will or should get you the lowest odds. Of course, you will probably see mostly familiar names in there. The second bucket, the podium contenders, are those racers who I think will be in competition unless, of course, they do have bad luck out there. And that is one note of caution when it comes to Unbound, because the course is so long, because the gravel is so rough in sections, because when there is a mud year, we have the nasty peanut butter kind of mud. There is a certain element of randomness to the race, which can lead to unexpected outcomes. And I assume race dynamics will also play an increasingly important role. So if you go maybe just 3-4 years back, then Unbound being so long and attritional was something that was often, not always, but often won by a solo rider who just happened to be the strongest man or woman on the given day. That has completely changed and continues to change because, as we talk about often on here, gravel, especially at the top end of the field, is getting more competitive. Everybody is training more and harder, and more riders, better racers come into the sport, including, of course, guys from World Tour, but also here from the European Pro Conti and continental race scene, start venturing into gravel just because the sport grew, became more relevant. And that means it is just getting more stacked with quality riders. And of course, this changes how these races work. And I think, like last year, we saw Lachlan winning from a breakaway move, essentially, and the second attempt, to be precise, because his first attempt ended in a wrong turn, as can happen in gravel. But as we figured out this season, it can also happen in road racing, but that's a different topic. We will see, I suspect, a race that, even though it is longer than any monument on the road in kilometers and much longer in duration, just because riding on gravel takes much longer, the speed is slower, will be pretty classics like racing. I assume we will have different breakaway attempts. We will have lead groups where attacks happen and unfold, because the way how you win Unbound is very different for different types of riders. I will get to this if we talk about specific contenders. But yeah, back to the buckets. The podium contenders are what I just said. The folks who I think are not quite on the level of the first group, but they can definitely get not only a strong result, they can even win if everything goes their way. As I just described, this is always a possibility at Unbound. The third bucket, the wildcards. So these are the folks who are definitely on my list, but there are usually some reasons why they cannot be found in one of the other buckets. For instance, injuries that they had lately. The preparation was not perfect. We didn't see them a lot this season. All this can happen in the wildcard. So this bucket doesn't actually have to do anything with the Lifetime Grand Prix wildcards that are also going to be decided after Unbound. If you're not familiar with the format, so this year both the men's and women's field of the Lifetime Grand Prix consist of 23 riders initially, and 2 wildcard riders who will join after Unbound, after this very race, having competed at Sea Otter and Unbound. But the bucket doesn't have to do anything with those. I also have some honorable mentions just to find a little space where I can name drop a few other riders as well. So that is how we are going to do it today. Let's start with the women's race, and I will take you through the different buckets in reverse order. That means we'll start with the wildcards. And the first rider in this bucket is Gerike G. Schreurs. By now, I assume everybody following gravel racing is familiar with G. She is a monster, one of the top competitors in the sport. She last year placed in second place behind only Rosa Klöser from I believe it was a 9-women group sprint, reduced group sprint. And she usually would be in a higher bucket, maybe in the top favorites bucket. However, as you by now probably have heard, she crashed back at the trucker in the 360 race when she was in the very elite lead group of the day. After the crash, she rode for another 130-ish kilometers with, as it turns out, a broken elbow. So she ended up not finishing, ended up not riding outside in the last weeks, being on the trainer, obviously. As I do when I prepare these previews, I did a fair amount of research. I was on her Instagram, tried to be on her Strava profile, but she has been quiet. The last post she made on her Instagram dates back to May 16th, so 11 days before now. And there she said, Unbound Gravel is still on the horizon, although it's starting to feel like a race against the clock. The start list still has her name on it. So assuming that in fact G is going to race at Unbound, probably even she doesn't know how good she's going to be on the day during the race, which renders her the perfect wildcard. I think with the perfect run-up and preparation for the race, she definitely has all the ingredients to win it. Will she have good legs? Will she even start? We have to find out, but don't be surprised if you find the name Gerike Schreurs on the podium or even winning the race. Next up, there is a racer that is not only familiar to people following gravel racing, but also to people who follow US road racing, because she is currently the defending national gravel champion. But just yesterday, she actually finished second in the US Nationals road race as well, where she sprinted for the victory against reigning Olympic champion Kristen Faulkner, who ended up beating her. Of course, I'm talking about Lauren Stevens. And Lauren Stevens is on a pretty good run this year so far, even though she has mostly been road and not gravel racing. A few of her results include the win of the Grawler, the big elite road race at Levi's Grand Fondo, which we also could watch, by the way, on YouTube. And there she beat a lot of the well-known gravel pros, predominantly the US ones, including notably Sofia Gomez Villafañe. She also then went on to do a fair bit of stage racing and competed in 2 US UCI stage races of the 2.2 variety. I, to be honest, didn't check out all the competition. Of course, we are not talking about World Tour competition here, but still, she won them in pretty dominant fashion, winning most of the stages in both races. And then she went on to the national championships. And my intelligence, I actually tried to confirm this, didn't get confirmation, but my understanding is that she is going to race the Unbound 200 this year. Why do I mention this? Well, because so far she did do the Unbound 100, I believe, 2 times. And of course, she won it 1 time last year, namely, meaning she knows the roads and the terrain at Emporia, and she knows how to win races there, but obviously not the big one against a much more stacked field of elite competition. Which is why I have her in the wildcard category as well. But also don't be surprised if she does get a incredibly good result. She is a force to be reckoned with for sure. So let's jump to the third and last name in the wildcard bucket. By the way, I believe I didn't mention it when I explained the rules, but there is a maximum of 3 riders that I can place in any of the buckets. But I don't have to put 3 in there if I think there are only 2 for the respective bucket and its definition. But here we have 3, and the third name is Morgan Aguirre, who you probably remember she was already on the show here when we did the recap of the Hills, which she won. And it was an incredible, epic race, a very tough day out, which counts massively towards me having her here on this list, because she doesn't actually have a result at Unbound yet. She DNF'd with a mechanical last year, but I think she has so far the best season of her life, having added another win after the Hills as well when she won the UCI Monaco gravel race, which looked like a pretty hard and also pretty cool UCI race on the calendar. And so she's on a good streak. She's also part, and we need to talk about teams here, as you will see, a fair number of racers that I have on this list are from Morgan Aguirre's team, Par Racing, which is pretty stacked, to be honest. If you heard me talk in essentially the Par Racing special edition that we did here after the Trucker with 3 of the 4 winners, which all were from Par Racing, incredible if you think about it, then essentially everybody explained that they don't deploy team tactics, that they all more or less race for themselves. And I think it's also, if you look a bit behind the curtain, it makes a lot of sense, because the racers on Par Racing all still have their own sponsors. They are essentially privateers, and Par Racing provides mostly infrastructure around them, like travel expenses and so on and so forth. But it definitely doesn't operate like a World Tour team. And so everybody is still motivated to get results for themselves. Still, they will not race actively against each other in most circumstances. And given that they are so strong as a team, this can, depending on how the dynamics on the day unfold, create advantages. For instance, if somebody is in a breakaway from Par Racing, then all the other people from Par have a good excuse to not pull and just sit in a chase group and so on. In Morgan's case, I could, for instance, see that she actually is part of a breakaway move if we happen to get one in the women's field. Last year, if you remember, it was essentially attritional, and the lead group just became smaller and smaller and smaller as the race went on. But if there are moves, I could see her being part of one. And in general, I think she is having a pretty good season, and a strong result is definitely in a possibility for her. Next up is the podium contenders bucket. And let me be honest, we're now also getting into the territory where it becomes really hard for me to say who goes to this bucket and therefore does not make it into the top favorites bucket, because, to be fair, all the names you will hear in a second are great racers and definitely also could win Unbound, and in some cases actually have won Unbound before. But I only do have 3 slots per bucket, and therefore decisions have to be made, hard decisions have to be made. And that is why Annika Langvad is the first racer in here. Now, depending on A, how long you've been listening to the Racing Show, and B, where you are based and what your cycling background is, you will either say, ooh, shouldn't she be a top contender? Or probably you will say, who's that? Of course, Annika Langvad, she's a legend, but mostly with a mountain biking background, marathon, cross-country, mountain biking, mostly, but also a very successful road racer, including Danish national champion, including very strong finishes in several monuments of the World Tour. In her, I think, 2019 season, the sole season where she rode World Tour. She's a 6-time Cape Epic winner as well. And this year, so far, in my book, she owns the crown for the most impressive performance when she utterly dominated a very strong field at Santa Val, the opening race of the Gravel Earth Series in Europe. Among the people she distanced by, I believe, over 10 minutes in the Queen stage was, for instance, the reigning queen of Unbound, Rosa Klöser, Annika Langvad. She has a proper engine. She is a top-level racer and competitor, and she definitely has a lot of the ingredients it takes to win a race like Unbound. So why isn't she in the top favorites bucket? Well, in essence, because of two things. For one, the Trucker 200 that she did earlier this month, where she placed in third position behind only Rosa Klöser and Sofia Gomez Villafañe, who, by the way, is also a teammate on Specialized Off-Road, was, if my research isn't mistaken, the longest one-day race that she ever competed in, both in terms of length, in kilometers, and duration, because that was a 6-hour something race. And of course, if we talk about Unbound, we are talking about an additional 120 kilometers. And that means 3-4 more hours than her longest race ever. Of course, she's good in stage racing, which we know from, for instance, the Cape Epic. It's a different kind of endurance, though, because you have the recovery in between the different stages. So here's something where we just don't know, because she haven't done it. Of course, if she's at the start line, I assume a pro, a legend like her, she comes prepared, and I don't doubt that she has the endurance for the day. It's just a little bit of uncertainty that we have, which downgrades her. And then in the races where she was together with Sofia, including at Cape Epic, where they were actually teammates, but also at the Trucker, I found Sofia just looked a tad stronger. Now, I need to mention that in both races also, she got injured, Annika Langvad did. She crashed and carried nasty injuries, or at least of the road rash variety, in painful little injuries, which impact your performance, which impact how deep you can go on the bike. Maybe she's actually stronger if she isn't injured. I don't think her preparation was too impacted. She's in this bucket because I only have 3 slots in the top 1, but I'm also not surprised if she ends up winning. That's the level of competitor we find here already. Next up, 2023 Unbound winner, past champion, Caroline Schiff. So, Caro is one of the strongest women out there. This year, her season hasn't been as great as you came to expect. By her standards, she only finished 6th at the Trucker 200. But it turns out, because like a week later, there was an Instagram post where she disclosed that she actually raced with an broken rib, which at the time of the Trucker hadn't been diagnosed yet, and she was just in pain, and so she couldn't go as deep as she usually would do on that day. Racing 200 kilometers with a broken rib, finishing 6th in a pretty stacked field is still a great performance. And now she has healed. She's on the record saying the rib is getting much better. And obviously, as a former champion, she is also coming for the win. It's a highlight, a race in her training calendar. She's going to try to peak on the race day, and that means she is a force to be reckoned with. She's also on Canyon, as is, and we will talk about her in a minute as well, Rosa Klöser. So they essentially have a 1-2 punch consisting of the past 2 winners in the race, and that opens tactical options. And while I have no information whatsoever, both Rosa and Caroline race on the road. They know how team tactics work. Now, they are both also very ambitious competitors, former winners. They will want to win themselves. I don't think that anybody is going to completely ride for the other, but still the tactical options that they have create opportunities that they probably otherwise wouldn't have. And that's important, especially if you are a racer like Caro, who has to win solo. Unlike Rosa, she cannot win a group sprint, most likely, and therefore she needs to get away solo. Let's see if she can. But if she gets it right, she can definitely be very high up there. Podium contender bucket, it is for Caroline Schiff. And with that, we are jumping to the top favorites bucket. The first rider in there is no other than Sofia Gomez Villafañe. Of course, you know her name. She's having an impressive season so far. She won the Trucker 200 against a stacked field. She was out there with Rosa Klöser for a long time, and then in the end, in the finale, managed to distance her third-placed finisher Annika Langward at the Trucker 200. Sofia won Unbound in 2022, essentially before the German ladies started the German winning streak, which we shall see if it continues this year as well. But she's in a similar camp as Caro Schiff, who I just talked about, because Sofia essentially has to win solo, and that is getting increasingly harder out there. For one, because the women now have to have their own race, they ride solo, which changes things, because if you have the power and the engine to stay with a strong man, but you don't have to ride in the wind, that can create large gaps. But of course, Sofia knows how to win races where the women have their own race as well. Just the course at Unbound doesn't have these features, these long climbs where it's easy to get away. There are also no single trail segments where you can solo away with your technical skills that Sofia possesses. It's mostly attritional. And we saw it last year in the women's race, where the lead group got smaller and smaller and smaller because riders either had mechanicals or, of course, they couldn't keep up with the pace of the strongest ladies on the day. And then the race was decided in a sprint. And there, Sofia does not stand no chance at all, but it's rather unlikely that she's going to win in a reduced group sprint. Still, there are segments, and we saw just at the Trucker 360, and I talked about it on the podcast, how Tobias Kongstad won the race that on paper doesn't suit him that well, because in that case there is too much climbing, but he soloed away for 150 kilometers, and maybe it's this kind of long distance solo that certain rider types need to try to win Unbound in 2025. I definitely don't put nothing past Sofia. She is one of the top contenders, but unlike in other races, it's not as easy and straightforward for her to win. as I also said, Annika Langwart is her teammate, and that could be a very great asset to have because it creates additional options for her, as I talked about before. Second name, Carolina Migon. She won the Trucker 360. She was here on the pod, talked about her race out there, which she won in the final single track segment where she distanced Sarah Sturm and Axel Dubois-Prévost, who were with her. It was an impressive win, the second in a row. And then I guess we can assume that she recovered well from this big effort because she already started her US trip and won the gravel locos with a 12-minute gap over the second and third placed riders, which by the way were also teammates of hers. So the entire podium was a par racing podium. Carolina, of course, being on the par squad as well. So she's in great form. She can win these races. Didn't have a great Unbound last year due to various technical issues, but if she can avoid those, then definitely engine-wise, power profile-wise, she does have all the ingredients you need to win Unbound. And she's on the par squad with a lot of strong ladies in there, which could definitely help as well. Don't be surprised to have Carolina be the queen of Unbound 2025. And then, last but really not least, Rosa Klöser, the defending champion. It's hard to repeat. We don't see a lot of repeats at Unbound lately, so it's going to be hard. Last year she won as essentially an unknown in the sprint, in the group sprint. She was not a marked rider, and we heard the story, how she flatted and she had to race for kilometers on an insert, catch back to the lead group. And so she is gritty. She has the mental fortitude, the resilience that it takes to win. And she is pretty strong. This season so far, we didn't see outstanding results from her. It was pretty solid. Early in the season, she had some bad luck in terms of health. I remember she had to skip the hills where she was actually already in town, but then couldn't race. The best result so far was the second place at the Trucker 200 behind Sophia, being away with Sophia all day long. So the form is there, couldn't just finish it off over there. But of course, Unbound is a different race, a different day. And just because she won last year in a group sprint, it just gives her more options to win than some of the other top competitors, which is why she, even though the pressure will be much bigger, the pressure from the outside, all the media engagements, the sponsorship activities she will have to do around the race will be very, very different from last year's Unbound for her, but also the pressure she puts on herself, because the way I perceive her, I don't know her personally, but the way I perceive her, she's super ambitious, and I think she only has one goal in mind, and that is winning again, repeating again. Of course, a lot of things need to go right in the mechanical and tire department, for instance, but even if all that happens, the competition is super stacked. That said, she has options to win. She can win solo and she can win in a sprint. She should have not too attractive odds otherwise bet on her. And with that, we are done with my buckets in the women's race. Also, let me mention the honorable mentions, the ladies that, while it pains me, didn't end up getting a place in any of the buckets. And these are Cecily Decker, who is currently the second placed in the Lifetime Grand Prix standings. She dragged, she pulled, she towed Sophia not all day long, but I think for more than one lap at Sea Otter. She has great legs. She likes hard, long days. So she definitely can be a force as well. Sarah Sturm, we just talked about her we talked about the Trucker 360. She has an engine. She can do super well. And I think she has the motivation to get a good result as well. And in the same vein, there is Axel Dubois-Prévost, the French lady who was out there all day long with Carolina Migon and Sarah Sturm. She this year does the Lifetime Grand Prix as well. And I think she has the engine, as we just saw at the Trucker 360, to do well in these races, as does Paige Onweller. Last year's, I believe, runner-up or third place finisher. She can do well at Unbound. She did do well at Unbound. Just didn't make the cut to be in these buckets. But these 4 names need to be mentioned. And I could be forced to apologize to any of them, as I had to do with Tobias Kongstad after leaving him out of my buckets at the Trucker. On that note, let's jump to the men. The first name I have in the wildcard bucket is a very familiar name to you listening here. It's Paul Voss, my regular co-host here on the Racing Podcast, founder of the Outside podcast, and Germany's most accomplished male gravel racer. He was in the second bucket at my Trucker preview, and I had him there mostly so people couldn't say, look, you're biased, Paul, he's your friend, yada, yada, yada. Well, it turns out just hours later, we found out that he actually couldn't start the race. So yeah, I do not have the inside track. Looking at the results so far this season, Paul did pretty well at his US block, did a few US races, and placed essentially everywhere in the top 10, including at the Grawler, for instance. He didn't finish the BWR, I think the California one. It was the California one where he was in the lead group until he completely smacked his rim and couldn't finish. But yeah, he looked good. Now, no Trucker, no racing since. We will have to see if he has a good day. Paul definitely has the engine to do very, very well. In my mind, he could be on the podium easily. So let's see how he does. Wildcard bucket it is for Paul. Next up, Simon Nordahl Svensson. I guess you heard of him by now. He won the overall of the Gravel Earth Series last year. Of course, he won the Garmin Gravel Worlds race, and he also was third in the Trucker 360 this year. And that is why he also gets in the wildcard bucket, in my book, a US block where he ended up not racing because the first race he wanted to do, forgot which one it was. He broke his fork and didn't have a fork, didn't have a bike he could race. And then next up on his schedule was the Mid-South. And there, as we all know, wildfires stopped the race from happening. So yeah, the Trucker 360, essentially the only race that he competed in this season. And he finished third. He has a track record at Unbound as well with a good result last year, 6th place. Namely, I think he can do well in Emporia. He's also part of the Par Racing roster, which comes stacked. We can keep counting the number of Par racers that I have in my buckets. He has number 1. Let's see where we end up. But he is a wildcard. And with that, that's it for the wildcard bucket. I didn't have a third rider, no third name that meets the definition of this, and so only 2, which means there are even more names to be distributed among the remaining buckets. Let's jump right into the podium contenders. Number 1 in there is Alexei Vermeulen. Alexei has a really, really good season so far. He finished on the podium of all 3 gravel races he lined up for this season, which include Sea Otter and BWR California. His best Unbound finish so far was in 2022 when he finished in 5th. And then we know last year he decided to skip Unbound. It was a much discussed decision. I remember the Bonk Bros on their podcast talking about how you can skip Unbound for the wedding of your brother. I think personally, of course, you skip Unbound if your brother is getting married, but that is a different discussion to be had. On paper, like with his road background, with long races being his cup of tea, Alexei should have a great performance at Unbound in him, of course, and that goes for everyone if the luck is on his side, if he doesn't have mechanicals and so on. But I will not mention this. It definitely goes for everybody I talk about here. Alexei, as I wrote about a few weeks ago, is one of the riders that started their own YouTube format. It's on the Alexei and Avery channel. And he by now released 2 videos about his Unbound preparation. And one talks a bit about his training. And what I found interesting is that he said that so far he just built all season long towards Unbound, where he actually intends to peak. I will not get too deep into physiology and training science, but to nail a peak is not super easy. I don't know who Alexei's coach is and how long they work together, but assuming the statement is true in the first place, and then second, they nail the peak, he would be at a higher level than he was at Sea Otter and at the BWR Cali race. If that is the case, he can definitely have a very, very good day out there, and I will put nothing past him, actually. As I just mentioned before, I had to apologize to the next man in the podium contenders bucket, to Tobias Kongstad. I did it when I had him on the show in person. I also did it in writing because the winner of the Trucker 360, the reigning king of the Trucker, didn't make my buckets in the Trucker preview. Yeah, I will not leave him off a list again, especially not for one of these very long attritional races like Unbound. Not after he just showed how good his form is when, as I mentioned before, he soloed away from the rest for 150-ish kilometers. He also has the track record at Unbound because last year he podiumed here when he won actually the sprint of the chase group, right? We had Lachlan winning last year, and then there was a bigger chase group which sprinted for the podium, and Kongstad won. And that means he has different options. He's a tall guy, big guy. He has the engine, but as he showed there, he also has the power to win a sprint, or what we call a sprint after more than 300 kilometers on gravel, which of course is not the same as a World Tour sprint after 150 flat kilometers on pavement. It's a different type of effort, but he can win those, and that creates different possibilities, different options, which I assume will be important. We saw the last editions of Unbound won in different ways, including from like breakaway efforts, but also from group sprints. And having this versatility is very helpful if you want to win the most important gravel race of the season. Third and last name in the podium contenders bucket is a guy who, well, if you would want to use a bit of snark, you could say he's the definition of a podium contender because he ends up on the podium of most races he starts, but rarely does he end on the top step of the podium. I'm talking about Peter Vakoc. He is something like the Mr. Consistent of European gravel racing. It's really impressive. You will find so many second and third places if you check out his pro cycling stats profile. But he just won the Grelloch, the Scottish UCI race, which is definitely one of the cooler races on the UCI calendar. Of course, a very different race from Unbound. Very hard to compare. But Vakoc definitely knows how to do well at Unbound as well, because he already finished second there in the year that Keegan won. Keegan beat Vakoc in the sprint. He can do well in this race. He does well in most races he starts at. In the piece that I wrote, in the preview piece that I wrote, I actually said, look, he's a bit like Wout van Aert this season. Does very well in most races, just rarely wins. Let's see if he can maybe win a big one. Don't be surprised if he's on the podium at all, because that is just what he does. Last but not least, he's also the leading contender for the wildcard spots of the Lifetime Grand Prix, which should give some extra motivation to do well. Could work the other way around too. Could create pressure. Let's see how he deals with it. But Peter Vakoc gets the third place in the podium contender bucket, which means we are getting to the top favorites, the last but definitely not the least of the buckets. Let's start with the name you all expect to be in here, Keegan Swenson. Look, he doesn't need an introduction. And essentially I could just leave it at that. Keegan is in this bucket, that's it. But I think we need to talk a bit more because, in fact, winning Unbound is definitely something that Keegan can do in 2025. It's something that he has done in 2023. We know the engine he has and how good he is. It's not the most optimal course for him. It's not a race at altitude with a lot of climbing. But still, Keegan is Keegan. He is a one-of-a-kind in gravel racing. But that said, I described how tactics are going to influence this race this year. And actually we already saw it last year, where I think he finished 16th or so. He was definitely outside of the top 10. And yes, I think he crashed and had a mechanical as well. But early in the race, when he was still in the lead group, we also saw that he was pretty much a marked rider. Nobody will let him go. Everybody will be sitting in his wheel. My American friends sometimes call it negative racing. As a European, you just call it tactical racing. But whatever term you like, that is how gravel racing is nowadays. It's not just friendly and attritional. It's highly competitive and tactics play a role. The most likely scenario from which Keegan could win is not a solo. I don't think that especially in the men's field, a rider like him, who is of the marked variety, can distance the rest of the pack. But he can win from a group sprint. Make the race hard all day long and then have a sprint. That is the way Keegan can win. But yeah, it's getting harder to win there, for sure. So even Keegan, while being a top favorite, I wouldn't bet on him if the odds are negative. Let's put it like this. And now, Mats Würz-Schmidt. I believe, even though he's a European, I'm happy that I heard his name mentioned on several US gravel podcasts in the last weeks, because rightfully so. Mats, who of course was now on the Outside podcast feed 2 times, once when Paul did his interview with Mats, and then the second time in our Trucker recap when I talked to him after he won the Trucker 200. As you know, if you are a regular listener, he has this World Tour background. He has the watts, he has the power. And while he just started gravel racing early this season, he very quickly found out how to win gravel races, and even significant gravel races like the Trucker 200. Technical gravel races like the Trucker 200 as well. So he brings a lot of the ingredients that you need. There are a few things that can have you raise an eyebrow as well. Some factors that introduce uncertainty and doubt. One of them being the fact that he told me on the podcast that he doesn't like mountain bike tires, doesn't think they are necessary. And while I'm definitely in the camp of people who believe different horses for different courses or different tires for different courses is a smart thing, I believe that the gravel, the terrain of Unbound around Emporia is definitely the terrain where mountain bike tires, the right type of mountain bike tire, not to say Race Kings or Dubs, makes a lot of sense. So the risk of flatting increases if you don't pick the right type of tire. And actually, when Mats started his US blog with the PAR guys, so yeah, he's one of the other PAR racing guys on this list, he actually flatted. So he did 2 races, finished one race in 3rd place, which was the rule of 3, where, yeah, Alexei Vermeulen told the story on his YouTube podcast. I don't remember, but he finished 2nd and told the story how they were a trio, and then there was the bad flat that took Mats a long time to fix. And then I think he had like 20 minutes or so. He was back 20 minutes to the winning group. And then a second race that he did was Gravel Locos, where he finished in 10th place. I have no information why, but I kind of assume that he also had a mechanical, maybe a flat. So yeah, that is one of the factors that makes me a bit doubtful, but also maybe he was lucky to have them and he decides to run different tires at Unbound. Let's see. The second factor of uncertainty is he doesn't have the experience in an effort like Unbound. I checked. The longest race that he actually finished was just shy of 260 kilometers, was a French road race, if I remember correctly. And he finished it in 6 hours, 9 minutes and 36 seconds in 14th place. So it's a long race, but it's a very, very different effort from Unbound, which takes 9 hours something to finish. Let's see how fast this year is going to be ridden. I assume he has the engine, the endurance, the durability to do well in such a long effort as well, but we don't know. Still, he definitely is one of the top favorites in my book. He mentioned on the podcast we did together that he has one sole goal, and that is winning Unbound. I'm curious to see how well he can do. If he doesn't have mechanicals, I put no result past him. And that takes us right to the third and final rider in the top favorite bucket. If you've been following along, probably you know who is still missing and definitely needs to be there. It's Matt Beers. Matt Beers, I guess you're familiar by now. He is a watt machine. He has such a strong engine. Recently, he was on the Cool Down YouTube format where Keegan and Alexei Vermeulen talk after races, and Matt Beers came on there talking about his best 20-minute power, and it was, if I remember correctly, 520 watts. That is incredible power. And this year, he's doing super well with very good results in races that on paper don't suit him that well because they feature a lot of climbing, including the Trucker 200 where he was the runner-up, including BWR California. So these are races that definitely, at least in theory, suit him less. So and that's unlike Unbound, where having raw watts is a key ingredient that you need to win. He can definitely do it. I was a bit concerned or surprised to see that I just 2 days ago, as I'm recording this, he mentioned that he was flying to the US from South Africa, where he spent a little time at home. Probably I would have preferred him to depart a few days earlier, but then on the other hand, let's trust in the stuff that he said in interviews earlier this season, that he figured out the traveling after now having done a few lifetime Grand Prix campaigns already. So assuming Unbound is a priority in his calendar and assuming that he wouldn't risk being not in top shape thanks to traveling, he gets the benefit of the doubt. I think he can win Unbound. I think he wants to win Unbound. As is always the case, if the good luck is with him, he can definitely leave there victoriously. A few honorable mentions, names that I want to at least name drop Mattia De Marchi doing the Lifetime Grand Prix this year. He's a crazy guy when it comes to long distance stuff. Let's put it frankly. He did this year for at least the second time. I think he has done it multiple times. The trucker, the thing at Trucker where he races the 360 and the 200. I don't know if he did the 100 this year actually, but yeah, he likes going long. He likes hard efforts. I don't think he's quite on the level that you need to be on to win, but then let's see. Another honorable mention, Magnus Baklaris, by the way, again, par racing racer. He did very well in some of the early European races, comes from a Pro Conti road racing background. Don't know anything about his performance at such long races. We will find out. And then a third name, maybe the most surprising one, is Ramon Sinkeldam. I don't know if I nailed the pronunciation, but he just won Gravel Locos about in a field that was probably not super stacked, but there were some notable names, especially from the European scene, in the top 10. If you don't know him, until last year he raced for Alpecin de Koenig in the World Tour, and now apparently has some fun doing the gravel racing. So it's the story of the road pro finishing his career and then doing some gravel racing. I think he does it without any real pressure, I assume, and that can be very helpful if you just go there for a day of fun with riding your bike. Of course, he can also fail massively, like many Euros do, but then it's one of these, sometimes you need to have these names where you take a look at them and think, let's watch it. And I'm watching it. So, these were all the names, all the contenders that I have. If you are of a opposing view, if you don't like the picks, if you think I missed someone, then you can let me know. You can let me know on the socials, of course, on Instagram or on Blue Sky. But what I would actually prefer is if you would jump over on our community Discord, the Outside Discord channel. How you get there is by becoming a Patreon member. If you want to support what we are doing here, you can do so on Patreon and join our community over there and on Discord. It would be really much appreciated. Over there, we can discuss about Unbound and all the other topics that you have top of mind. And now, with that out of the way, let's see how Unbound is going to play out. Actually, I'm super excited. I hope you are too. I'm stoked that we will get to see the race live in full length. I will hear you once it's all said and done.